tough situation. When someone dedicates their life to serving their country, proves their skills and courage, only to be told they're no longer welcome because of who they are.
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation for those affected.
And that's what thousands of transgender service members are facing right now with this executive order from President Trump.
Right, banning them from serving openly.
And it's not the first time we've seen this debate flare up.
No, it's not. We saw similar attempts from Trump back in 2017 and 2019.
Yeah, we've been here before. But this time, the language feels different somehow.
I think so too. It feels more charged.
Like phrases like radical gender ideology.
Yeah.
It's a bit jarring.
It is, and it's almost like this order is trying to connect personal identity with the definition of honorable military service, like questioning the humility and selflessness of transgender individuals,
Yeah,
which are obviously core military values.
absolutely. So let's get down to the details. What does this order actually mean for the roughly 15,000 transgender individuals currently serving?
Well, the Department of Defense is still working out the specifics, but it's definitely creating a lot of anxiety for those serving.
Understandably.
I read the story about U.S. Navy Commander Emily Schilling. She's a transgender pilot with combat experience.
Wow.
And despite proving her ability to serve, she's now worried about losing her entire career and the benefits she's earned.
That must be incredibly difficult to deal with, having that uncertainty hanging over you.
It is. And even if some transgender service members are allowed to remain, there are further concerns.
Like what?
Will they face more harassment? Will their chances for promotion be limited?
It's true. Those worries go beyond the immediate question of discharge.
Exactly.
And the executive order also claims that providing gender-affirming care for transgender troops is a burden on the military budget.
Right, but when you look at the actual numbers, the argument kind of falls apart.
How so?
Well, the Defense Health Agency spends about $3 million per year on this type of care.
Okay.
That's a tiny amount compared to the nearly $300 million spent on erectile dysfunction medication.
Over a similar period.
Right.
So the financial argument seems a little weak when you put it like that.
It does. And it makes you wonder if cost should even be the primary factor when we're talking about individual rights and the right to serve your country.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
What about the arguments against the ban? What are the key issues people are raising?
Well, one of the biggest is the impact this ban could have on military readiness.
How so?
Well, think about the experience and skills of people like Commander Schilling, pilots, doctors, special forces members. Replacing those highly trained individuals would be incredibly difficult and could create a real gap in capabilities.
So some are saying that instead of making the military stronger, this ban could actually weaken it.
That's the argument.
Right.
And then there's the broader issue of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, judging individuals based on their gender identity rather than their proven capabilities doesn't send a good message about who's considered suitable to serve.
Exactly.
And this executive order hasn't exactly gone unchallenged. There have already been legal challenges filed.
Right? Oh, absolutely. Organizations like GLAD and the National Center for Lesbian Rights have filed lawsuits,
Wow, so fast.
citing discrimination based on both sex and transgender status. And they're relying heavily on the Supreme Court's Bostock v. Clayton County decision.
Which ruled that discrimination based on transgender status is a form of sex discrimination.
That's right.
So there's a strong legal basis for challenging this ban.
Yes, and it'll be very interesting to see how these cases move through the courts. It actually reminds me of a similar lawsuit from back in 2025.
Oh, really? What happened?
GLAD and the National Center for Lesbian Rights represented 6 active-duty transgender service members
Okay.
and 2 individuals hoping to enlist. One of the service members, Army Second Lieutenant Nicholas Talbot, said something really powerful. He said, "When you put on the uniform, differences fall away, and what matters is your ability to do the job."
That's a great quote. Really gets to the heart of what should matter, capability, not identity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that 2025 lawsuit was built on that Bostock v. Clayton County decision. The argument being that this ban discriminates based on sex, which the Supreme Court has already ruled unconstitutional.
I see. So legally speaking, the situation is complex, but there are strong arguments against the ban.
There are.
It's interesting to me, though, that there seems to be a lot of internal support within the military itself.
Oh, definitely. Commander Schilling, for example, has talked about how much support she receives from her colleagues.
Even with everything going on.
Even with all the turmoil,
Yeah.
it shows there's real camaraderie and appreciation for the contributions of transgender service members within the ranks.
That's encouraging to hear.
It is. It highlights the fact that someone's ability to serve should be based on their actions and dedication, not their identity.
It really does make you think about what kind of military we want.
Yeah.
One built on exclusion or one that welcomes the talents of everyone willing to serve?
It's a big question, and one that goes beyond this specific issue. This debate really forces us to think about what it means to be a soldier and what values we prioritize as a nation. When you think about it, the military has been seen as this defender of traditional values,
Yeah.
and they've often resisted social change.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It makes you think this ban might be less about military effectiveness and more about pushing back against these societal shifts we're seeing.
It's possible, and it speaks to this larger tension we're seeing everywhere.
Absolutely.
The struggle between upholding traditional norms and evolving to understand gender and identity in new ways.
And how does that play out in the military specifically?
Well, it's such a hierarchical institution
It is.
with a strong emphasis on uniformity and following orders.
Exactly.
And that can clash with the idea of individual expression that we often associate with LGBTQ plus identities.
Yeah, but at the same time, the military also values courage, resilience, and overcoming adversity.
That's true.
So it's almost like there's this inherent conflict.
Mm.
On one hand, upholding tradition, but on the other, embracing the very qualities that are essential for a good soldier, regardless of their gender identity.
Yeah, exactly. And this isn't a new conflict either. We've seen it in different ways for decades.
Oh, definitely.
Think about the integration of women into combat roles,
Right.
or the repeal of don't ask, don't tell.
Right.
Every time there were predictions of disaster, claims that these changes would undermine unit cohesion and weaken the military.
And yet history shows us those predictions were wrong.
Totally wrong.
The military adapted and became a stronger and more diverse fighting force.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
shows how the military can evolve and adapt to these changing social norms while still keeping its core values and effectiveness.
So we have this historical precedent for the military evolving on social issues, even when there's resistance,
We do.
which makes this current debate even more interesting.
It does. It really makes us confront the definition of what it means to be a soldier in the 21st century and whether that definition should include gender identity.
And as these legal challenges go through the courts, the outcome could impact things beyond just the military.
Oh, for sure.
It could have huge implications for LGBTQ plus rights in general.
Absolutely. This isn't just about who gets to wear the uniform. It's about equality discrimination and what kind of society we want to live in.
It's a lot to think about. And while we wait for the legal process to play out, it's important to remember the people affected by this ban.
Yeah.
The anxiety, the uncertainty, the feeling of being ostracized after dedicating your life to service.
It's crucial to keep those individual stories at the forefront.
Absolutely.
Because behind the legal arguments and political back and forth, there are real people whose lives are being deeply affected.
People like Commander Schilling, Lieutenant Talbot, and countless others
Right.
who simply want to serve their country with honor and integrity.
Exactly.
And their stories remind us that this isn't just an abstract debate. It's about the lived experiences of real people.
And their voices are so important. As we work to understand this issue, we need to listen to those directly impacted about, understand their perspectives, and make sure their concerns are heard.
Their stories bring a human element to this whole debate. They remind us that it's not just about policy, it's about people's lives,
Exactly.
their hopes and dreams, their sense of belonging.
You're right. And as we deal with this issue as a society, it's crucial to keep that human element in mind. Because ultimately, this isn't just about winning a legal battle. It's about creating a more just and equitable world for everyone.
It's a powerful reminder that the fight for equality is ongoing,
It is.
and even in institutions as seemingly rigid as the military change is possible.
Absolutely. And history has shown us time and time again that progress often comes from challenging the status quo
Right.
and demanding a more inclusive vision for the future.
Which is what we're seeing now. Transgender service members, their allies and legal organizations are pushing back against this ban.
Yep.
They're fighting for their right to serve and their right to be recognized as equal members of the armed forces.
And their efforts are part of a larger movement toward greater inclusion and acceptance for LGBTQ plus individuals. This movement is gaining momentum, not just in the military, but throughout society.
It's a hopeful sign.
Hmm.
It suggests that despite the setbacks and challenges, the fight for equality continues. And by learning from the past and listening to those most affected, we can work towards a future where every individual has the opportunity to serve their country with honor and dignity, regardless of their gender identity.
Now, this isn't just an American issue either.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Policies regarding transgender individuals in the military are different all over the world,
Exactly. And looking at how other countries have handled this can offer valuable insights.
especially for those who might be skeptical about it.
Exactly.
So what are some examples of countries that have successfully integrated transgender personnel into their armed forces? You mentioned Canada, Australia, and Israel earlier.
Yes, those are great examples. In Canada, transgender individuals have been able to serve openly since 2017.
Okay.
And the military has implemented comprehensive policies to support them, including covering the cost of gender-affirming health care.
So they're not just allowing service, they're actively supporting the well-being of transgender service members. What about Australia?
Australia's had a similar policy since 2010.
Wow.
They've even gone a step further and appointed a dedicated advisor on gender diversity and inclusion within the Australian Defence Force.
That's really impressive. It shows a real commitment to creating a welcoming and inclusive environment.
It does. And in Israel, which has had a policy allowing transgender service since 1993, they even cover the cost of gender confirmation surgery for their personnel.
1993. That's a long time. They must have a lot of data on how it's impacted their military.
They do, and studies have shown that including transgender individuals has had no negative impact on their military's effectiveness. Some even argue it's enhanced their capabilities by broadening their talent pool and creating a more diverse and representative force.
It really proves the point that judging people based on their gender identity instead of their skills and dedication is not only discriminatory, but also hurts the overall strength of a military.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the potential in every individual and letting them contribute their talents to the country's defense, regardless of their gender identity.
This all brings us back to the heart of the debate. It's about making sure anyone who is qualified and willing to serve has the opportunity to do so regardless of their gender identity.
It's about recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every person and creating a military that reflects the diversity of the nation it serves.
A military that values the contributions of all its members.
Exactly.
It's about creating a stronger, more inclusive, and ultimately more effective fighting force by embracing the talents and contributions of all Americans, regardless of who they are.
Well said.
You know, it's really interesting to see how other countries have approached this issue.
It is. It's definitely worth looking beyond our own borders.
It can give us a different perspective.
Yeah, especially for those who might be skeptical about letting transgender individuals serve.
So you mentioned Canada, Australia, and Israel. What are some examples of how they've integrated transgender personnel into their armed forces?
Well, Canada's a good example. They've allowed transgender individuals to serve openly since 2017,
Okay.
and their military has implemented these comprehensive policies to support them.
What kind of policies?
Well, they cover the cost of gender-affirming health care, for one.
So they're not just allowing service, they're actually supporting the well-being of their transgender service members.
Exactly.
What about Australia?
Australia's had a similar policy since 2010,
Oh, wow.
and they've even appointed a dedicated advisor on gender diversity and inclusion within the Australian Defence Force.
That's a big step.
Yeah.
It really shows they're committed to creating a welcoming and inclusive environment.
It does.
And you mentioned Israel, too.
Right. Israel's had a policy allowing transgender service since 1993.
Wow, that's a long time.
And they actually cover the cost of gender confirmation surgery for their personnel.
That's amazing. They must have a lot of data on how this has impacted their military.
They do. And studies have shown no negative impact on their operational effectiveness.
So it hasn't weakened their military at all?
Not at all. Some argue it's actually made them stronger by broadening their talent pool and creating a more diverse and representative force.
So it really challenges the idea that having transgender people in the military somehow makes it less effective.
Exactly. It highlights the fact that we should be judging individuals based on their skills and dedication, not their gender identity.
When it comes to military service, that's what really matters.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a really thought-provoking conversation. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
I think the biggest thing is to keep an open mind about this issue.
Yeah.
Challenge your own preconceptions and listen to the experiences of transgender individuals who have served or are currently serving.
Their stories are so important.
They are. It's about understanding the human side of this debate.
And recognizing that transgender people are just as capable of serving their country with honor and distinction as anyone else.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us today on DRM News. We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on this complex and important issue.